Why, thank you.
Okay, so yes, Madeline is my dear coworker. She is her official title is coordinator of the music library, which means she's head of the music library. She's the music and performing arts librarian at the University of Houston, and she has all sorts of secret like pathways in her life that are so interesting. For example, she has a degree in Afro-Cuban music, and she is a professional salsa singer. And when I thought it was interesting that when she had her interview here, she told us she was in a spirituals group. And in general, she's keeping us all in line. And, you notice my white hair pulling us into the 21st century at our library. And it just so happens that Madeline also has done some research on William Grant Still and has some, documents and has done some interviews. And so he's a very interesting figure. And the introduction that I gave you about Madeline, or actually the Bill added this. I looks like Madeline also is going to talk a little bit about, music in the Jim Crow era. Well, William Grant Still, even if he was an art composer and everything, that's when he was functioning too. So that's those were the terms under which she had to function. So I'm going to turn over to Madeline. Oh, by the way, also Madeline has been leading summer anti-racist reading groups for faculty and staff at the Arts College at University of Houston. So she was our leader for when we read How to Be an Anti-Racist. And then this summer I was in Wyoming, but everybody else was reading White Fragility. So that was, you know, Madeline is, helping us do the hard work. Thanks so much, Madeline, for coming.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lang, for that wonderful introduction, and good morning, all. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you very much for this invitation. Before I start to share my slides and get in going, I want to make sure that you're all hearing me well. If you could all give me a thumbs up if you're hearing me okay, that'd be great. Fantastic. Or this, it doesn't matter. We're trying to be as accessible as we possibly can today. Wonderful. Well, I'm so glad. Thank you for your warm welcome, and thank you all for your invitation. It brings me great pleasure to be with you here virtually at Covenant Church. As I understand it from Bill and Rose, the church is doing its best to pay very close attention, give serious attention to racism, ethnocentrism, and related inequities. And I am very thankful for that. And as Dr. Lang was mentioning, last year I had the great gift and pleasure of being able to leading an Amplifying Voices series, which were comprised of book talks, um, presentations, electronic and physical displays, and electronic exhibitions of books, creative works like scores and recordings, all intended to focus attention on underrepresented literature, creative works, and research. So today I look forward to speaking with you about William Grant Still, known by many as the Dean of Afro American Composers or Harlem Renaissance Man. So I have shared my screen with you. I do hope you're seeing. You can give me a nod if you can see my screen. All right, and probably me in a little box over to the side. Fantastic. Thank you for your nods. I appreciate it. Um, I do look forward to speaking to you about this, and I will hopefully engage you in some conversation as we move on. But we do continue to witness deep, profound racial inequities and calls for eradicating systemic racism in our nation. As Dr. Lang and I work together in our unit, we see in our universities as well as in the arts. And as Dr. Lang mentioned earlier, or maybe I think it went out in the introduction in your emails. I was working as a music librarian in Boston, Massachusetts during the Unite the Right rally in August of 2017. And it was here where my students began to come to me, come to their local librarian for resources to support their desires to write protest music. So I was like, oh my goodness, it was unexpected. I didn't know what to do, so I turned to the internet to try to find some help. I started to stumble upon different hashtags, different syllabi, and then started reaching out to my friends in the digital humanities and libraries, as well as in politics, to see how my colleagues were engaging people more broadly on issues of the day. And I was really lucky to stumble upon the Ferguson syllabus, as well as the Charleston syllabus. And related to libraries, many of you might be really well aware of hashtag Libraries Respond, which is a fantastic place to see how libraries are amplifying current events and social justice issues. It's also a great place to find things like links to syllabi and reading lists and just all kind of other really fun stuff. Now, I want to stop my sharing for a moment and make sure we're all kind of on the same page here. Please feel free to unmute yourself and take the stage as I ask this first question. I want to you noticed me use the word hashtag a lot a moment ago. I just wanted to make sure I stop as an information professional and make sure everyone knows what we're talking about. Can someone unmute themselves, take the space? Tell me, what is a hashtag and how do they function?
Lisa's going to help us.
So a hashtag is frequently used on platforms like Twitter to mark off a sort of a conversation. So everyone uses that hashtag to participate in that stream of discussion.
Fellow information professional, spoken just like a fellow information professional. Thank you very much, Lisa. Yes, think of hashtags as a way to connect social media content to a specific topic, right? Just as Lisa mentioned a moment ago, an event or a theme or a conversation. Hashtags like the hashtags Libraries Respond or hashtag Charleston syllabus or hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag Black Music Matters make it easier to discover posts around specific topics because they aggregate all social media content within that same hashtag. And I figure, I'm an information professional. I was invited to this adult education group. I felt that it was very important for me to take a moment to insert some thoughts about information discovery in a web environment. And as we are here meeting in a web environment, I find it more and more important in this era of information, disinformation, misinformation, to pause and talk a little bit about how things work a bit. So I'm going to go ahead and get my my screen back up here. You are looking at another hashtag right over here. And I saw a great quote on your adult education website by educational theorist Jerome Bruner. Discovery favors a well-prepared mind. And at the end of these hashtags are a plethora of resources, reading lists, videos that I hope that you may wish to take inspiration from. There's a lot to discover freely at the end of these hashtags, as well as an opportunity to evaluate resources as you continue to shape Covenant Church's response to the social unrest unfolding in our country. And over the years, all kinds of social change has been very incremental, and the calls for more change are very real. As a performing artist, as artists are on this call, all artists of all kind continue to lead the conversation and actions that contribute to substantive transformation. And I'm saying socio-political expression in the arts is nothing new. And in my first 2 years as coordinator of the music library at the University of Houston, I've had the unexpected gift and pleasure to work collaboratively across the Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts to increase the college's capacity for anti-racist work and build strong, inclusive learning environments across the University of Houston libraries, as well as the University of Houston and Gulf Coast Performing Arts community. So again, thank you so very much for bringing me here today with you virtually. This wonderful opportunity to speak with you about William Grant Still, 20th century American composer. Hopefully we'll see together, uncover together, discover together, prepare our minds together this invigorated spirit that was whose compositions, whose work, whose life was impacted by the changing racial and social landscapes of the United States in the 20th century. So today we will center our conversation around the life and works of William Grant Still and create discussion around this question: how have the arts helped us understand how race and ethnicity function, excuse me, I moved too fast, in our increasingly visual and technological world? How have the arts helped us understand how race and ethnicity function in our increasingly visual and technological world? And by centering the next maybe 30 minutes together, this question, I hope to touch on issues of race, class, musical style, genre, gender, and geography, all on the backdrop of the ideas and realities of the Harlem Renaissance. So I hope that sounds pretty good to you. If it sounds pretty good to you, you can give me some sort of look online, some sort of this, finger snaps, anything, because I don't have an audience in front of me, but I am an extrovert and I do respond well to people around. So in order for us to, in order to be, my mother's on the line, Elaine Shackelford's here. Thanks, Mom, very much for being here. In order to be, she's a speech and language pathologist and has instilled in me the necessity to ensure that any sort of conversation that I engage in, I am supporting multiple learning styles. So as I will do my best to do that in the next 35 minutes or so, we will hopefully engage in more conversation. At any time while we are engaged online, please unmute yourself. Take the space to engage in the conversation. I have embedded 3 different guided listening opportunities of William Grant Still's music. And then I have done my best to keep things interesting by embedding plenty of primary resources to fill your screens throughout the presentation. Okay, I hope that is all right with you. We will go ahead and get back. I have my sound shared. So as Jerome Bruner has again said, discovery favors a well-prepared mind. Let's start with this quote. I will go ahead and read it and go ahead and read along with me. This is W.E.B. Du Bois' famous statement in The Souls of Black Folk, written in 1903 about racial doubleness. The Negro is sort of a 7th son, born with a veil and gifted with second sight in this American world, a world which yields him no true self-consciousness, but it only lets him see himself through the revelation of the other world. It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, 2 souls, 2 thoughts, 2 unreconciled strivings, 2 warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder. The history of the American Negro is the history of this strife. this longing to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self. In this merging, he wishes neither of the older selves to be lost. Now, Du Bois' insight about what he calls double consciousness or two-ness of African Americans carries particular weight when considering creative artists like William Grant Still, whose desire for a fusion of widely separated musical styles plays out Du Bois' aspiration to merge his double self into a better and truer self. William Grant Still's roots were African American, Southern, and relatively elite. Both of his parents were college graduates, very rare among African Americans of their generation. Both followed the teaching profession and were highly regarded because formal education for so long was denied. Was widely understood as fundamental to race progress. His genteel training, his enduring sense of high obligation to better the lot of his race, as well as his position of relative privilege, made him a member of what W.E.B. Du Bois had labeled the talented 10th of the generation of the Harlem Renaissance. And I do want to pause here just for a moment and talk a little bit about I want to make sure we're, again, talking about the same thing. Please, does anyone want to unmute themselves and talk to me about the talented 10th? And what is the talented 10th?
I had one kind of obscure question. There's an asterisk under Second Sight. What was that all about? Is there was that a typo, or did that mean something? The asterisk after Second Sight in the W. Du Bois.
A Second Sight, that was part of the quote that I had pulled. I'd have to kind of look it up and make sure that wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a mistake.
Okay, never mind.
I had taken that directly from a book, but I can have a look at it and respond to you more thoroughly later. So, does anyone want to unmute themselves and talk about the talented 10th?
How did they come into being? Why the talented 10 at that time instead of some other time? Well, how did they come about, the talented 10?
Okay. I mean, I know. Does anyone else want to talk about that, or know a bit about it? Want to share before I jump in?
As I dimly recall, the talented 10th refers to the sort of Black elite of sort of highly educated people who were sort of thought to be responsible for uplift. And but I'm sure you could tell us much more.
I'm just kind of testing the room and wanting people to unmute and take some space as they feel so inclined to. Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you very much, John. I'm going to kind of pull your question into some things. Hey, William Martin, I saw your hand go up. Hi.
I just I assume I've heard the term for a long time, and I assume that he was just speaking. I think incorrectly. I assume that he was speaking about statistically there is a 10th of the Black population that is very talented but unrecognized.
Very talented but unrecognized. Oh yes, hey, hi.
Okay, so it's been a long time. Something to do with Booker T. Washington, though, right? Wasn't Booker T. Washington? Didn't he say the only way this gets better is the talented 10% at the top must, lift us all up. And then W.E.B. Du Bois saying, hang on a second. Okay, right? There's some argument with the two of them.
Oh gosh, yeah. Both of them have, said that there is this, it's basically a class designation. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, John. Thank you, Lisa, for your interaction. Yeah, there's this, it's a term that designated basically a leadership class. of African descendants in the 20th century. So, John, you mentioned, why not before? Why not another time? In the United States, slaves, this is post emancipation, right? This term was actually created by white Northern, actually, philanthropists, and then actually publicized by W.E.B. Du Bois, right, in his essay, The Talented Tenth. And this caused a lot of communication between other Black elites at the time. And yes, what was it? William mentioned 1 in 10. I believe in W.E.B. Du Bois' Talented Tenth, his essay, which was basically the publicizing and of this term, says basically the 1 in 10 Black men have cultivated the ability to become leaders of the Black community by acquiring a college education, writing books, and becoming directly involved in social change. And as Lisa mentioned before, so this talented 10th, Du Bois and Booker T. Washington and others, yes, Laura, argued that these college-educated African-American men should sacrifice their personal interests and use their education to lead and better the Black community. So you guys were right there, right there. John, you mentioned, you had a good question, like, why not before? The whole, class distinctions as we understand it, in different in white cultures and enslaved people cultures in the United States isn't necessarily the same kind of like class distinction that kind of comes out of the emancipation movement, right? So slaves were pretty much, they were chattel, right? And they were divided into, I want to say, just kind of like goods, like the desirable slaves and the not desirable slaves, right? And for various reasons in various situations, some were encouraged to read, some were encouraged to worship alongside, some weren't, some were only field workers, so post-emancipation, kind of William Grant Still's family, mother as well as father, who passed away, and his stepfather, kind of came from that class of slaves that were, I guess, favored in that society. I hate to use the word, but favored. So he kind of grew up with this kind of genteel education and with this instillment that your education is used to uplift, right? I don't know if anyone else wants to kind of jump in or add anything else there, but this is a conversation, and anyone else have anything else to add, or questions about anything before we kind of move in forward into the Harlem Renaissance and Talented Tenth? Anything else? You're all in my gallery, so I'm looking at the faces right now. Okay, before I get back to the pretty pictures, right? Share sound. All right. So thank you for that. So Young Still and his violin and his buddies, yes. William Grant Still observed a lot of music making practices in his community. His grandmother sang traditional religious music, as you all have known, spirituals. I'm a former Jubilee singer. That was what Rose was mentioning earlier. But his musical inclinations laid with European-influenced African-American concert music styles. And here was a little bit more about the Talented Tenth. So here's a little bit more here. I jumped right over that, but I think we already talked a little bit about that. But as we move into his musical making practices, we see that he's very unique in his desire to play and write and experiment with European-influenced African-American concert music. And his first role model was Samuel, the Afro-English composer, Samuel Coleridge Taylor. He had other older contemporaries that wrote also concert music, very rare for the time for African Americans, that drew from the same tradition. Nathaniel Dett. And you may have sung, or I need to come visit your church because I don't know what type of things you do, but you may know the word Harry T. Burley. He did a lot of wonderful concert settings of Negro spirituals that I've sung in so many churches. He's the big guy that I know, but he was a friend of and mentor, and encourager of William Grant Still as well. And then Will Marion Cook. Also, these are all contemporaries writing concert music that drew from that same European influenced African American concert music style. And William Grant Still had a great interest in classical music, especially opera. And in his life, unlike many composers, he was able to devote much of his time to composition. And he created operas, symphonies, ballets, in addition to his commercial work, which is, where we'll get into talking a little bit about the Harlem Renaissance right now. In spite of this like energy and patronage and audience and neighborhood that shaped the Harlem Renaissance, this immediate effect of the cultural boom of the 1920s for African American musicians as well, in particular, still, was to provide more opportunities to do the same, though at a higher level with more respect. As popular genres move from minstrel shows to Broadway revues like Shuffle Along, and opportunities for new artistic departures that were called commercially sustainable were very, very limited in this time. And many of the Black entertainers and artists who achieved substantial fame or success did so in Still's lifetime by performing selected aspects of African American culture to a predominantly white audience. And this process involved this continuing mediation and adaptation among Black and white cultural performance traditions, among stereotypes held both by Blacks and whites about themselves and each other. In presenting himself as a composer of concert music, Still chose a path that was very much less traveled by members of his race, a path less understood by both Blacks and whites to this day. And as a composer of concert music, he crossed many barriers of class as well as color, forcing him to rethink his, as Du Bois mentioned, racial doubleness or two-ness in new ways. And by pursuing his interest in composing concert music, he addressed the popular performance traditions of the time while demanding a true fusion of European and African American traditions, using this uniquely new American voice, taking a step towards giving African Americans a direct view of themselves with direct representation in European-derived concert music. He addressed the world as a universal composer that often chose his own form of African American derived musical speech. So he has a very famous concert work called Afro-American Symphony. It was written in 1930, finished in 1930, and was the first symphony written by an African American and performed for a United States audience by a leading orchestra. This piece is like the central paradigm for working out the fusion aesthetic that he had struggled for over nearly a decade, and I hope my sound is working. I'm going to go ahead and click play. I have shared my sound. You may need to turn things up a little bit. Back up a little. What are your reactions and responses to that? Hi, Dr. Lang.
I love the luxurious sound that he was able to get out of the orchestra.
Yes, I agree. That was fabulous.
Oh, I know, it's so lovely. I like the word lush. Hi, Karen and Bill. Hi.
Hi. It sounds to me a lot like Gershwin. I'm reminded of that whole time period.
You can hear his, of course, he wanted to write opera. He wanted to be more of like a, what is it, the serious music composer. But you can hear that his background in commercial music writing comes right out in that. Yeah, I've heard the same thing. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other responses? Yes, Susan.
I like the laid back rhythms. I mean, it beckoned bodily interaction.
I tried to look at your faces and see who was moving a certain way at a certain point. I'm happy to share these slides. The entirety of Afro-American Symphony is embedded in these slides, so I'm happy to share with you all this later, so you can just take a listen to everything at the end.
Please do.
Because I know church happens in a little while, so you can't just sit here and listen to this all day.
I was intrigued by the painting. It's got these people and there's this distant city that maybe it was unattainable. I don't know, but that intrigued me.
I'm not sure who it is. I'll have to have a look and maybe write a footnote about that. Thank you for that. It is a pretty one. That's why I chose it. I just liked how it looked. Any other immediate reactions to this? Yes.
I thought I heard kind of variations on St. Louis blues or some blues song.
There you go. There you go. So I see Paula going like this. So that was one of the things that was kind of interesting about his fusion. He used blues a lot in his as part of his musical style. Unlike some other composers of the time who were really focused very, very much on more popular styles, jazz, but he really, really focused on on blues as a part of that musical language. Good ear. Yes, William.
Bill's fine.
Bill, yes. I see the name in the little corner, so I say,
I understand. There was a little bit of summertime in there once, just feel like, I said, whoa, that's summertime. But I'd already been thinking, gosh, Gershwin has a nice Gershwin sound. From the muted trumpet at the beginning and all that. It's really, you're right. It just makes you want to, even for me, want to sway a little bit.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad I chose this one. What a reaction from you. And I think what you're all, getting around is, William Grant Still really wished to convey through Afro-American Symphony, this great truth of his. Didn't have only everything to do with his religious convictions, but more directly with the creative synergy that's possible among American cultures, which I think maybe even in that picture, the kind of the image there, it kind of, it represents that, the synergy among American cultures, as the African-American influence took the position that he desired for it. And he desired to be an equal contributor, an American voice, a uniquely American voice. And in this quest to achieve this goal, he went very far out of his way, as Lisa kind of heard and everyone else heard here, to avoid stereotypical portrayals of African-American culture, most obviously through his creative use of the blues. Most obviously. Anything else before we move on to Harlem Renaissance poet Langston and William Grant Still? Anything else? I'm glad you had such a great reaction to that. Thanks for all of your sharing. This is so fun. Here we are. All right, so Langston and William. So I'm sure you may have seen these words before. I dream a world where no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man is free, where wretchedness will hang its head and joy like a pearl attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream my world. These words, in many ways, contain the hopes and aspirations of the composer William Grant Still, who wrote 8 operas during the first half of, you've used these words. Oh, how lovely. I'm so glad, Laura, you mentioned that. Then, we're right here. We're right here. Then thank you again for allowing me to be here. I'm glad that, glad to share this way. William Grant Still wrote 8 operas during the first half of the 20th century, and in 1937 he began working on the opera Troubled Island with Langston Hughes as his librettist. Yes. And he completed this opera in 1941. And although, William Grant Still kind of has earned this place in American musical history for his contributions to the instrumental repertoire, his 8 operas have really remained essentially virtually unknown, unfortunately. And his deepest desire was to be a great composer, a recognized composer of opera, which was for him the ultimate form of musical expression. So Troubled Island, I promised you primary resources, so we've got, looks like a coffee stained one here, but I had to share this with you. So Troubled Island is, in a nutshell, set in Haiti in 1791 and portrays Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the corruption of his leadership during the Haitian Revolution. And he declared himself as emperor of an independent Haiti, but was assassinated by components. And we can only listen to the very beginning of the opera, but this was performed only, I believe, one time in 1949 by the New York City Opera, and it is the only one of his operas to be staged by a major opera company. And this guy has written 8. But let's have a listen. Reactions?
Is there I guess a movement or is there anybody trying to get these to present day stage, these symphonies and these operas?
As far as I know, yes. So Opera South, also a company in Mississippi did a television staging of one of his operas, The Bayou Legend. There have been some small scale stagings of a few of his things. Highway 44 USA was done like a studio version. So smaller scale opera companies have set scenes of some of his operas, done television versions, but the only large scale like opera like the Met or New York City Opera, this is the only one, 1949. And actually there was a very long, as far as when you look at the primary resources, audience reception was great.
I bet.
Ovations, right? However, critics panned it. Critics totally panned it, and you were like, "What? And so he returned to, in his later years, he moved to Los Angeles. He returned, and he was just kind of disappointed by how it was well received up front, but I guess people just weren't ready for it. Reviewers weren't ready for it. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk a little bit. Hey, Dr. Lang.
Yeah, I did want to comment that does not sound like Gershwin to me. And I thought of operas about revolutions that are written in Western Europe. And I also, immediately thought of Toni Morrison as well. So I feel like this is, we need this. I don't know.
I agree. Thank you, Dr. Lang. Bill.
Very necessary.
I watched Bayou Legend, watched and listened to, and recommend that. You can. There's some real talent as well as it's really worth listening to.
You can get a copy for 50 cents. It said 50 cents on the. I'll bet if it's coffee stained and signed by Ashton Hughes, it's probably more than 50 cents.
Any other? Yes, Paul.
My question is why? Is this too comprehensive a question? Brings too many strands together. Why weren't his operas performed in his lifetime? And why have they not been performed in the 40 years since, when he is such a talented person? Is this a tying together of all the strands of racism and cultural cancellation? It wouldn't seem to be a conscious thing, but certainly an unconscious reaction to a talented man who didn't fit the stereotype. Is there a why, or is what we're addressing the why that's coming out now?
I think you've touched on a lot of things. I think that there were a lot of he definitely challenged people's expectations of what at that time Black people should be writing. Black and white people to this day are still like, why would this guy at a time? So he chose to start writing symphonic music, chamber music, art music, and operas at a time that those spaces were becoming particularly entrenched in whiteness, right? Like at that time, right? So remember, this is 1949. This is pre-civil rights. My mother hadn't been born yet. Sorry, Mom. I have to always throw you in here. But yeah, as I giggle. But yeah, I think you're touching on a lot of it. But I think a lot of you in this room, in this visual space, may be able to even add more to that. Add more to that. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but I think he was quite ahead of his time. And although you do see a lot of his scenes being done in opera workshops, like at Eastman, More even when I was a graduate student at in California, I purposely chose to sing his arias because nobody else was doing them. No one else was doing them. They're great, so I took that as an opportunity to learn, and to also inspire the educators that were educating me. So I think it's a slow process, but people haven't stopped. But it's expensive to put a full scale opera together, and I just think that we haven't found the right benefactors yet. But I'm not saying that that's not. I'm not saying that I'm not going to be a person who's going to be potentially a part of getting all 8 of his operas staged by a major opera company. I'm going to continue to try to add to that, and maybe you will as well. Any other reactions? I do see something in the chat. Hi, Bill.
I was just going to say, and this I don't mean to be trite, but it was not so much his being ahead of his times, but the times being behind him.
All right, I'll take that. Yeah. Oh, and I see Barbara Rose says there's a lot of discussion in the classical music community about inclusion programming right now. That white European male composers are emphasized and relied upon, and as I've had conversations with my mother, we will always love those. We will always look to those as well. However, as this is an amplifying voices kind of presentation, there are just some that have been overlooked and not relied upon for whatever social, political, or economic reason. Thank you, Bill, for that. And I noticed, Laura, you mentioned in the music video.
Yeah. So our church members, Ryan and Tanya McKinney. Ryan McKinney is a fairly well-known opera singer, and they've become these opera filmmakers in the pandemic. It's a really interesting thing that's happened in their lives. But they filmed baritone Kenneth Overton in this on-site opera project called The Road We Came, which explores the history of Black people in New York. And Ryan and Tanya are the filmers of this, not filmers. Wow, you get the idea. Anyway, so one of the songs that Kenneth Overton sings is Grief by William Grant Still. So that's the only thing I knew about William Grant Still, and I'm glad to know more. But I wanted everybody to know that our little Covenant world has a little connection to opera, and our little connection to opera also includes William Grant Still.
Indeed. A lot of, I think Grief is from his song cycle, songs of, oh gosh, that's one that many have chosen to do, that voice teachers of mine have done in their faculty recitals. And I do think that, that more is coming. And I do think that this is exciting to just continue to have conversations like this here at Covenant. Anyone else have any other reactions or questions or desires or just urges?
I have an urge to say I am so thankful that I'm learning in my lifetime that this is just starting, and I want to live to be 150 years old so I can see everything. Thank you.
Isn't it great to just affirm that you're a lifelong learner?
More so, it's great. Your great presentation has helped me. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's such a gift and pleasure. Oh, yay. I saw snaps. Thank you so much. Thank you. You guys are just absolutely fantastic. And I've got one more listening example. I know you guys have to get ready for church, so I'm not going to keep you too long. So the hard part, the harder part. So William Grant Still grew up in an era in which whites adhered to the one-drop rule that classified all persons with any Black ancestry whatsoever as Black, or at the time Negroes, and subjected them to Jim Crow prescriptions. Although his parents never encouraged him to think across racial lines, Still was very fully aware that he was Black and was painfully reminded of the fact, maybe some occasional slurs and insults directed at him. He can recall on a trip to Georgia With his grandmother, he witnessed a frenzied mob of whites out, quote, out for the blood of a Negro accused of rape. In 1940, he wrote a cantata, And They Lynched Him on a Tree, which is a choral ballad, to a libretto by Catherine Garrison Chapin and performed by New York Philharmonic. It is a dramatic choral work for orchestra and racially divided choirs, very, again, well received at its premiere, but remains underperformed, and I believe deserves to be performed not only as a token work by an African American with a rough subject, but as a well-crafted American masterpiece and plea for justice and peace. So the cued section that I have for you is basically a movement from And They Lynched Him on a Tree, and it is the contralto solo called O Sorrow.
And the day he left me, going down the road to a man's world, and him creeping home, running from the men, and the dogs baying in the pine woods. And I remember the flies buzzing in the courtroom and the judge saying over
reactions? That's a hard one.
You can feel the sadness and the tragedy. It's just so real, and it's very moving.
Isn't
I
it?
love the repetition of the word sorrow. Great word.
Mm-hmm.
Makes me think of Dr. James Cone, the cross and the lynching tree, just the echo of, oh, Jesus, and thinking of Jesus as a lynched Black man. It's beautiful, hauntingly beautiful.
Any other reactions? Please, I invite you to unmute yourself and take this space.
Yeah, I think this points to the power of music because it can move you past being like frozen in horror, that, you know, into a new place and into a place that like advances you in your self-development, really. So,
Indeed. Indeed.
My strong reaction at this point, since we do have to close, is how much you have blessed us this morning. It's just been really, really terrific. And you say that all the various things that you showed us, that they're the links we can go through the whole things, right?
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
yes.
That's I thought that was the case, but that's excellent. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Yes,
Thank
thank you very much for everything. And are there any additional? This was the last bit of everything, but this has been wonderful to come here and talk with you about William Grant Still. He was definitely a creative artist who challenged several musical establishments in the course of his career. A composer who identified as Black, who left the Black world of popular music, making you know, in order to compose symphonies, ballets, and operas. As we were talking, just as these were becoming thoroughly entrenched in white-only spaces. He left the world of jazz at a moment when many of his colleagues were turning their gaze to it for their advantage, and he was quite a pioneer and achieving artistic success in the face of very long-standing racial barriers. So this American Voice, I'm grateful that I am able to share more information about this American Voice. I will continue to share my slides and do my best to answer some questions in a follow-up email to the chair of your Adult Education Committee. I thank you very much for your time, your invitation, and I look forward to seeing you in person and worshiping with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
A great pleasure and a gift, as I said before. Thank you.